Hey everybody, I'm Eric Gerlach, and this is another talk on Daoism. Daoism and opposite perspectives. So, last time was mentioning that Daoism often uses the example of perspective and the all-mom, or being itself as something like a mother that takes on many different types of being and many different types of perspective. So Zhuangzi, my favorite Chinese philosopher, there's the cats in the background. Yes, been working on the shelves. Zhuangzi, my favorite Chinese philosopher, has many impressive stories that show opposite perspectives and how we can be limited by how we live and what we see if we don't see things oppositely. A sage named Zi says that when the wind blows, you can hear many sounds made by many things, including the whistling of trees and the wailing of hollow logs. But there is only one wind, only one jumping, leaping cat. There's two of them. There is only one wind, suggesting there is only one living thing that makes different sounds, like two cats. Right there. Ow. Hey, pal. When it moves out of different mouths, minds thinking different things as equally living beings. He then says, words are not just wind. Words have something to say. But if what they have to say is not fixed, then do they really say something, or do they say nothing? People suppose that words are different from the peeps of baby birds, but is there any difference, or isn't there? What does the way, the greater way of all the different ways, the perspective of all the different perspectives, the greater mind, if you will, being itself, what does the way rely upon such that we have true and false? What do words rely upon such that we have right and wrong? Baby birds' chirps likely mean something to mother birds, but they don't mean anything to us unless we take the perspective of the mother bird, much as Alice is against in Wonderland, and then we can understand, right before the Duchess and Relations, what they are saying easily. Similarly, if Alice says that she's not some kind of serpent, and the bird says, well, as far as I'm concerned, if you eat eggs, you're some kind of serpent to me, then in a certain sense we can see things like Alice along the Wittgensteinian duck rabbit and see that in some ways to the bird, a little girl that eats eggs is some strange kind of serpent, a la John Carpenter's The Thing. And to Alice, she's no kind of serpent at all. That's easily disprovable with simple Aristotelian logic. The question is, whose side is Lewis Carroll necessarily taking? Because Zhuangzi would say he would take both sides and say, well, Alice doesn't understand and the bird doesn't understand. And that's the whole understanding of Lewis Carroll right there, plenty, as well as whatever else he's understanding in it. So, when asked what we can all agree to, a sage named Wang in the Zhuangzi replies, there's many different sages just thrown all together in this text, which many say means Zhuangzi is one sage. There's plenty of other early Taoist sages of the time, and they're all getting sort of lumped together as the wisdom of Zhuangzi. You can see it. Wang says, I do love this quote, if people sleep in damp places, their backs ache, and they end up half paralyzed. But is this true of fish? If people live in trees, they are terrified and shake with fright. But is this true of monkeys? Of these three creatures, which knows the proper place to live? We eat the flesh of grass-fed and grain-fed animals. Deer eat grass, centipedes find snakes tasty, and hawks and falcons love mice. Monkeys pair with monkeys. Deer go out with deer is the older translation that I have. And fish play around with fish. There's pairing, playing around, and going out, and chilling. Men claim, it continues, that Mao Qiang and Lady Li were beautiful, possibly the sort of, as of Greek culture, the legendary Helen of Troy, the archetypal beauty. But if fish saw them, they would dive to the bottom of the stream. If birds saw them, they would fly away. It's very much the anti-sleeping beauty. It's not that nature flocks to you because you're all beautiful. And if deer saw them, they would break into a run. Of these four, which knows the standard of beauty for the world? Which would suggest, as you find with much Greek skeptical thought and perspectivism, with these exact same sorts of animal and people perspectives. You can hear the delicate sound of the cat chewing food as we speak, and the drilling outside, the many sounds of nature. which are all working wonderfully as examples, living for the text, other than the drill bit. So another strange sage called Zhou of the North Sea, who is this guy, tells us that from the point of view of the way of all things, things are not good or bad, but from the point of view of each thing is itself good, others bad, and this is the view of all. So notice, all of the things liking themselves and not liking the others is the all view. And they maintain that. A lot of times people think that relative or subjective truth is like non-existence of truth at all. Of course, it would be positioned situational truth, and here he is situating it. So each thing thinks it is good, and this is what should be true for everyone, which is true, but not in the way in the whole situation as each thinks, as we can easily see. It's a very political day to day and all of that. Joe tells us that all things are big if big means bigger than something, and so all things are big and small, which would be language for significant and insignificant with more syllables, meaningful. Big and small is often means important and unimportant, which are central to meaning, as well as useful and useless, also central to meaning. It is here, Joe tells us the example of the well frog, which has become a common way of calling someone ignorant in Chinese culture. You can't discuss the ocean with a well frog. He's limited by the space he lives in. You can't discuss ice with a summer insect. He's bound to a single season. You can't discuss the way with a cramped scholar. He's shackled by his doctrines. Damn you! Now you have come out beyond your banks and borders and have seen the great sea. So you realize your own insignificance. Of course, the text would probably be how small you are, the simpler language, from simpler syllables, how small you are each thing is. From now on, it will be possible to talk to you about the greater way. The greater way of things is beyond your smaller way. A central metaphor that teaches perspective in Zhuangzi, one of his most famous, is the dream of being a butterfly. This is very Matrix and Descartes and Plato, a bit of the cave. And the dream theme comes up in many Taoist texts and tales. The original dream of Zhuangzi is that he fell asleep and dreamed he was a butterfly, and when he woke up he said he no longer knows if he is a man who was dreaming he was a butterfly, or if he is a butterfly who now dreams he is a man. In a sense, he could very well be saying thus that you dream that you are who you are right now, and then you dream other things at night, and then you dream things waking as to what you and others are. If this sounds strange, let's just say with psychology, much of our lives is imagination. You can look at the Sharvakas of India, think everything is false other than what you directly perceive. But much of what we live in life, Buddha would claim, is living in ghost caves. And a lot of our lives are in our imagination. I think especially now on a very political day, it's good to mention, a lot of what people think is true in the world is what they have to think is true in the world. They can't see it directly, and that means what it means in all these different sorts of directions. Let's just not pass commentary on this and that in particular and say, yeah, much of what we understand anything to be beyond our immediate senses is a lot of complex social thinking, passion, all of that, living inside and outside of us in all of these ways. I think that is what the Taoists are definitely pointing into us to in all of these examples, and what Zhuangzi seems to be saying when he says he may be a butterfly who's dreaming he is a man. I don't think he's suggesting that as a testable thesis. I think he's showing that that is an open possibility, because like Wittgenstein's thought experiments, it shows that trust and truth and meaning are interdependent and situational in concrete ways. So, in the Liese, the third classic of Taoism, Yin of Chu is a rich master who works his servants hard, including an old slave who falls asleep each night and dreams he is a rich king without a care in the world. When asked if his life is hard, the slave says he can't complain. Yin of Chu, the lord, however, constantly worries about losing his fortune. The master, a la Hegel, losing in the turn of things, and every night dreams he is a slave who has lost everything and worked hard as he works others hard, and works hard as he works others hard, afraid of losing his status and becoming like the others who he works. When he asks a friend about this, his wiser friend tells him he has too much more than others, and Yin decides to demand far less of his servants. He didn't emancipate all the servants, slaves, etc. But you find in Chinese thought play with servants and slaves and freedom all the time. And I do remind people do that a bit with America and the West, and they say, aha, it's freedom. And Chinese thought and culture has a lot about freedom, and then Americans often are like, well, China isn't free. Not at all. And that's not how Chinese people see themselves, shopping online and doing stuff entirely, I think. But it's something where people have a hard, well, let's not get into all the politics of it. Let's just say that it's hard to trust what you cannot see directly outside of stuff. So, yeah. In The Dream of Lu Dongbin, the story of how the most popular of the 8 Taoist immortals met an immortal and became one. This is an excellent story and awesome. And may have something to do with Star Wars, because his name is Lu, and he meets Han. Lu was a brilliant student who had dreams of power and position in the imperial court. The immortal Han Zhuangzi. So there's a Lu meeting a Han who's more experienced and older, which is like Star Wars, Luke meeting Han. Oddly enough, and then this is also not like that, because Han is the superior Jedi here, and that's not like Star Wars. But Han, the immortal, so he's already a Taoist immortal. He has already, through practices, become like Jains of India and others. He has become, in China, somebody who has, according to Taoist early and or later beliefs, conditioned himself to become a much longer living, wider seeing being who can leap tall buildings in a single bound like a Jedi or Superman or something like that, because he has transmuted his body and mind into higher forms of existence, is the ways of this, which finds its way in culture, not only into a bunch of East Asian culture, which is awesome, and movies, but also into, I believe, Star Wars and Jedi powers and other things like that. You can see, and now we have a lot of anime in our lives and in the younger generations, etc., and all of that. Which is good. We can do more direct videos about all that in the future. But yes, there's a Lu and a Han, which seemed like a Luke and a Han here, oddly. And interestingly enough, Han Zhongli, the older immortal, who is an immortal and going to get this guy to be one, who had been a general in the army before leaving common life behind, becoming a sage, saw the student and recognized his true potential beyond worldly power. Oh, it is the mental over the physical. So he offered him wine, began to heat it, and Lu fell asleep from the fumes of the wine. A lot of times in ancient culture, again, wine or intoxicant can mean any sort of concoction in the Greek or Chinese world, full of all kinds of things, including alcohol, which helps, and dreamed from the fumes that he was fantastically successful, got everything he ever wanted out of the system, in the court beyond his wildest dreams, with foreign emperors hanging on his every word. He has national and international success. Not only is he successful in his culture and gets everything according to the way things are set up, but he also, then beyond that, is impressing everybody and getting everybody into his culture's way of doing stuff. That's all there in the story. Unfortunately, the emperor died, and the new emperor, threatened by Lu. So now we have an evil queen in the medieval fairy tale here. Suddenly there's an evil person in power in Western and Eastern stories, where we have an evil authority who needs to be countered with people standing up to it or being destroyed by it. And we seek freedom or equality or not with that. The emperor died, and the new emperor, threatened by Lu, had him exiled and his whole family put to death. Wasn't good to get in that position, as many Taoist stories say. As Lu cried over his family in exile, he woke and found he was still sitting in the inn with Han, and the wine was not yet hot. It was all a dream. Yes, he did not used to read Word Up magazine. I don't believe he did. I don't believe it was existed during that time. Lu realized the way of earthly power is not the true way, and he left everything to join Han in the mountains and become immortal. That's what I suggest we do this afternoon, is leave to the mountains to become immortals. Yes, it's the Berkeley Hills. Let's run screaming into them. Tan Chao, who lived 860 to 940 CE, so more a Tang dynasty, medieval, around the year 1000, dying just before then. Later Taoist, says in his Book of Transformations, which he wrote around 930, that children playing with shadows don't see the shadows are playing with them. Crazy people who hate the way things look don't see the way things look makes them hated. Those who run households don't see the households run them. Those who rule countries don't see the countries rule them. The wise leaders of ancient times didn't know their wisdom would turn into the glory of later leaders. The glorious leaders didn't know their glory would turn into the love and justice of later leaders. The loving and just leaders didn't know their love and justice would turn into the war of empires. People do not have a constant state of mind. Things do not have permanent forms. He also says we can use sound to make trained bears dance, which seems to imply that through sound and through the mind and through the higher of things you can rule the lower passions and the beasts and the elements. Seems to imply, which is nice ancient thinking the whole world over. Tan says when emptiness turns into spirit, think about dreams within dreams, Matrix style, etc. When inceptions of inceptions, when emptiness turns into spirit, spirit turns into energy, energy turns into form, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. Yoda is a very Taoist sage, very much. Tan says when emptiness turns into spirit, spirit turns into energy, energy turns into form, form turns into life, life turns into attention, attention turns into social gestures. Psh. Social gestures turn into elevation and humiliation. These turn into high and low positions. These turn into judgment. Judgment turns into status. Status turns into cars. Think your wagons, coaches. Cars turn into mansions, palaces. Mansions turn into palaces. Palaces turn into banquet halls. Banquet halls turn into luxury. Luxury turns into hoarding. Hoarding turns into fraud. Fraud turns into punishment. Punishment turns into rebellion. Rebellion turns into armies. Armies turn into terror. Terror turns into defeat and destruction. Notice the cycles of the cycles, and one doesn't know that they're going into this way, which turns into that, and going that way, and turning into this. And so standing back from it and seeing how what you think is good circles around into bad, and it is very much a dream. Life, 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 as in the beginning of Wonderland, is but a dream. Tan says when this comes, its momentum can't be stopped. When it goes, its power can't be removed. Beings do not wish to be born, but have no choice but to be born. Beings don't wish to die, but have no choice but to die. Those who see this way empty themselves and feel for others. In this way, their minds can avoid change and their forms can be unborn. Now, with this, there's a strange sort of psychoanalysis Tan gets into here, which is like lenses of perspective, and it is very gendered, which is, again, more of the Taoist gendered interesting stuff. There's a thing here where emptying yourself, a lot of times people would think, say, eating less, talking less, feeling less would be nihilism and terrible and empty. But what skepticism and relativism often teaches is if you do less, you have more. And that is a give or take. I think by dogmatism or skepticism being too firm, being too open, I imagine we could screw up either way. But what you have in this is that if you empty yourself of feeling, you can feel more for others and hopefully for yourself as well. If you are stilling and calming your feeling, you can then feel feelings more. So oddly enough, just like if you rest your eyes for a while, you can see better. If you rest your feelings, you can feel better. And if you calm your mind and your words, you can speak better. That is what seems to be implied by the text. Not that you stop feeling, but empty yourself and then feel more calmly, subtly, in better ways. Hopefully, steady with the ways of nature and more balanced. So Tan says our senses are like four lenses, one shaped like a rod, a jade scepter, which, think about a jade scepter here gendered, that makes things look small and insignificant. So when we look at things like a jade scepter, which makes things look puny and stupid and small compared to us, we look large and awesome. The second lens is shaped like a pearl, contrary to the scepter, which makes things look large and important. So if you look at things from the perspective of the lesser, this seems female, and again, I'm not going to describe to many men online why pearl would be a female thing, but they can figure this out at length. The scepter seems male, and looking at things like male, which makes things look small and weak, you look at things more with the female, things look large and important, which again, of course, thinking of perspective of male to female and female to male here. The third is like a whetstone, a sharpening rock that makes things look upright, makes things look true and righteous. And the fourth is like a bowl, think convex, that reflects, and this probably means it either reflects sound or reflects light such that you can see the reflection upside down in a metal bowl. You can see yourself upside down in it or something like that. That makes things look upside down. So this is a Taoist in around the year 900, well, around 930. He is saying you can see yourself reflected upside down in metal. And so we can look at things as important, unimportant, and as upright, true, and upside down, false. Which important and unimportant would be very much meaning, and upright and false would be very much truth. So you have truth and meaning, and there's four different lenses, male and female. It looks like both because the whetstone to the bowl also seems gendered as well. I am going to do more stuff about Alice in Wonderland, but with Edgar Allan Poe, I do like saying he says things are good, bad, tense, or calm, and card players watch for people to be good, bad, tense, and calm in combinations. This is not exactly good, bad, tense, and calm, but there are ways of looking at emotions very simply, and looking at thought and philosophy very simply, and seeing more there than you did before, And we should always learn more from the sciences. But people seem to think something, I encounter all the time, people seem to think something scientific, that's good. It's like, well, if we think through it and we see something, that's what's good. Whether or not it's religious, scientific, who cares? It works, it's all right. Again, we look at things as significant, insignificant, depending on how we look at through the lenses. This does all suggest we do look at things as unimportant, easy and calm, important, difficult and tense, upright, familiar and good, and upside down, unfamiliar and bad. And it suggests if we look at things as if we are insignificant and things are upside down first, that would be the female to male kind of complementariness, as looking at things as backwards, then as forwards also, which would be a bit counterculture to the culture as we'll lead on down through here, and also female to the male. And there's many concrete examples of using things in backwards ways. I do also point out, Wittgenstein makes a great deal in his later work about things feeling like they fit and feeling now I can go on. And rather than see logic as a basically linguistic or mathematical thing at all, as a verbally formal thing, and here mathematics would be verbal intelligence, certainly, also spatial, and all of these other things interwoven. But that at base, logic might be very emotional, and that means feeling that something fits and now I can go on is elements of math problems. Each and every math problem, because if we don't feel things fit in a math problem, we do not go on. And that these are basic elements of logic we read in people's faces like pose card players, which I do think the Taoists are trying to make us aware of, is that emotion and situation change truth and meaning in definite ways that are subjective. This does not mean truth is higgledy-piggledy. It means truth and meaning take definite human, animal, subjective forms. We already have the human to the animal and the male to the female as concrete human and animal within animal forms. I do always like to say, Indian, Greek, and Chinese skeptics oftentimes make the examples of different types of culture, different types of humans, different types of animals versus humans, which is thought experiments of perspective, concrete perspective, etc. Tan says, if we test and use these, we use the lenses, not that you should stop being, say, strong or masculine or effeminate or anything you want to be, but that if we test and use these perspectives, much like one could say with gender and counterculture, people are testing different sorts of positions, and I'm not endorsing people being more or less sexual at all, because I don't honestly believe that people being more or less sexual is simply an answer to anything. Again, this video is made for children, so, or at least marked that way. So yeah, we don't get into it. But the Taoists do. But hey, if we test these different sorts of things, and we find that the different lenses through which we look at with life show us that we can look at things as dominant. I do believe in Gestalt theory. There is the underdog and then the overdog. I'm not sure. I want to say it's underdog is the character. But yeah, underdog in then overdog. Again, I don't want to say alpha wolf because that's not what he was saying. But I think his name is Pershing of Gestalt psychology. And again, this would be looking at things from the lens of the conqueror, looking at things from the lens of the oppressed and marginalized. You have all sorts of different angles here already that just make very simple sense with all kinds of philosophy, psychology, religion, culture, all across humankind. And again, this is what I would call brilliant medieval, if we want to just place it between Daoism and modern times, as well as other things as medieval, this word, as far as like something axial, ancient, and then modern, which we can loosely use these words. Then we have something like a medieval, powerful Chinese Taoist psychology here, which is quite philosophical and quite amazing. It certainly predates plenty of Freud and Jung, and they were looking into these kind of Chinese sources as German, Austrian folks. Tan says that if we test these things, we can find that no things are simply large, small, desirable, or hateful, which again, so we also have true liked or disliked, big or not small. Oftentimes, big and small is actually not just good or bad. Big and important often, or small and insignificant usually means neither good nor bad. But big oftentimes means something either very good or very bad or both. So there's lots of interactions of these kind of things you can see in these sorts of texts. Tan uses animal perspectives, like Zhuangzi, and says that for the owl, the day is dark and the night is bright. But for us and the chicken, it is the other way around. Which is normal and which is not. You can't say daytime is more fit for animal perceptions, as it depends on their organs. It depends on the circuit of the light, and just as words and my words and meaning and emotions to you only mean something to you because you have similar emotions, you feel good, bad, tense, and calm in similar ways that I do, which is why I can drink water, It's not fizzy, so it doesn't make a sound like all the other beings of the world. That with all of these things, we may think, oh, my words are simply true. And usually that's some kind of philosophical cop-out where both Zhuangzi and Wittgenstein says part of the trick is you can go forever and find simple truth. So how much stomach do you have? As Schopenhauer says, how much of sea legs do you have for truth and meaning? Because there's so much simple truth and meaning to see, and people have been writing about it and talking about it for thousands of years across humankind. Some evolutionary biologists, I did learn recently, argue that the eye was originally created, and I do believe that this is a dominant theory, and I'm happy to be corrected, as with all of my armchair science, much of it social, this not, was created for helping creatures avoid the light. That originally light sensors, eyes, simpler syllable, less scientific though, is eye sensors, scientifically, helped creatures scientifically and rationally avoid the light and then hide rather than seek light. And later that same thing, hooked up to a bunch of other complex things, became light-seeking. So if you have eyes and they seem like they seek light, and that's great, they were for light sensing and then avoiding. And now our eyes are way into light and we have all sorts of things. And then if somebody flashes something in your face, I read a terrible joke on Reddit the other day as I was beaten with a camera. I still have flashbacks. And yes, maybe we do have deep impulses to avoid flashes of light, claps of thunder. Perhaps this is the power and wisdom of the gods or not, or merely wrath. In the box. And what is in the box? All right, so that's enough of that. We're going to follow with Most Try Too Hard and talk a bunch about stories of Zhuangzi and others about how overexerting yourself and thinking too much and feeling too much is too much. And that then you can empty yourself out and see more. As with most of these talks, what I am drawing as a general conclusion is that there's many things going on, feeling, talking, sensing. And as in the course of Buddhist philosophy and Asian philosophy, which this lecture is core for, we can see Asian and Eastern and Western and human thought talking about the various ways we think and sense and feel, and trying to negotiate and figure out all of that, and stepping back, emptying yourself out, and saying, wow, there's many ways of feeling, talking, seeing, and living, and eating, and thinking, and breathing, is very Taoist and sounding, and trying to make sense and truth in the world somewhat with all of these beings and animals, and this whole zoology, to be more scientific and precise about things. And all-inclusive. So, simultaneously. So, that would be at the same time in simpler syllables, but not simultaneously. So we're going to follow with Most Try Too Hard. We're going to follow that up soon. I will hopefully record that later tonight. So, have a good day, everyone. Hopefully, we have a good day, year, month, lifetime, etc. And look at a village to see like a village. I'm going to look for my cats to see like some cats. And I bid you adieu, along with the French.